You're standing on a wooden deck in the middle of the Atlantic. The sails are set, the wind is filling them, the ship is moving, alive, doing exactly what it was built to do. But there is no one at the wheel, no one below, no one anywhere. The table is set for a meal that was never eaten. A child's toys sit untouched. 10 people were on this ship yesterday. Today, there are 0. This is the Mary Celeste, found drifting on December 5th, 1872, and everyone thinks they know the ending. Storm, mutiny, pirates, wrong. When I ran the physical evidence back through modern analysis, every single one of those explanations fell apart in my hands. What I found instead points to a chain of 3 small mechanical failures that convinced an experienced captain his ship was about to explode beneath his feet. And I can trace it to a specific research project completed in 2007 and a barrelwood detail buried in the original cargo manifest. This is not legend. This comes from court transcripts in Gibraltar, from the salvage records, and from a filmmaker who spent 7 years doing what nobody else bothered to do. Stay with me. Because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Let me take you back to the beginning, because the beginning already breaks the story you've been told. The Mary Celeste left New York Harbor on November 7, 1872. She was a brigantine, about 100 feet long, carrying 1,701 barrels of denatured industrial alcohol bound for Genoa, Italy. Her captain was a man named Benjamin Spooner Briggs. And here is the first thing that never fit. Briggs was not some reckless drifter. He was 37 years old, the son of a sea captain, a devout, sober, careful man who had commanded ships for years. He owned a share in the Mary Celeste himself. He had brought his wife, Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia Matilda, on board. A man does not bring his baby daughter onto a ship he thinks is dangerous. That single fact haunted me from the first night I started reading about this case. I remember the exact moment this stopped being a casual curiosity for me. I was cross-checking the crew list against the ship's provisioning records late one night, and I realized the galley still held roughly 6 months of food and fresh water when she was found. 6 months. Whatever happened, these people did not run out of supplies. They did not starve. They did not die of thirst on board. They simply left, all of them, at once, into open ocean. The crew of 7 were experienced sailors, several of them German, described in the records as steady and reliable. No history of trouble, no reason to rise up against a captain they respected. So already the mutiny idea is wobbling before we even reach the good part. Now, here is what the crew of another ship saw. On December 5th, 1872, a British brigantine called the Dei Gratia was crossing the same stretch of Atlantic, roughly 400 nautical miles east of the Azores. Her captain, David Morehouse, spotted a vessel moving strangely, yawing, sails partly set, no one responding to signals. Morehouse actually knew Briggs personally. They had dined together in New York before both ships sailed. Imagine recognizing your friend's ship drifting empty across the sea. His men boarded her, and what they found is the reason this mystery has never died. The ship was wet inside but seaworthy. There was water sloshing between decks, but not enough to sink her. The cargo of alcohol was almost entirely intact. The captain's navigation instruments, his sextant and marine chronometer, were gone. The ship's register papers were gone. And the single lifeboat, a small yawl lashed across the main hatch, was missing. Think about what that combination tells you. Pirates would have taken the cargo, which was valuable. They didn't. A storm violent enough to sweep 10 people overboard would have shredded the sails and swamped the hold. It didn't. But someone took the time to grab the navigation tools and the ship's papers before leaving. That is not panic in the face of a wave. That is a decision. A deliberate, chosen departure. They meant to leave. And they meant to come back, or at least to survive. So why didn't they? The Board of Inquiry in Gibraltar wrestled with this for months. And here the story takes its first ugly turn. When the Dei Gratia towed the Mary Celeste into Gibraltar to claim salvage money, the case landed in front of the Attorney General of Gibraltar, a man named Frederick Solly Flood. And Flood made up his mind before he understood the evidence. He was convinced there had been violence on board. He seized on details that seemed sinister. There were dark stains on the deck. There was a sword found under the captain's bed with what looked like marks on the blade. There were cuts along the ship's bow that he decided were made by an axe or a tool. Flood became certain the crew had gotten drunk on the alcohol, murdered the Briggs family, and fled. But the physical evidence turned on him one piece at a time. The stains were tested and were not human blood. The marks on the sword were rust and polish residue, not blood either. The alcohol on board was denatured industrial alcohol, poisonous, undrinkable, the kind that would make a man violently sick, not drunk and happy. And the cuts on the bow were later identified as natural splitting of the wood and marks from the vessel's own fittings, not axe wounds. Flood's murder theory died, but notice what happened. The official investigation started by trying to force the evidence to fit a story of violence, and when it couldn't, it simply left the case open with a shrug. No conclusion, no answer. 10 people were declared lost, and the file was effectively closed with the truth still missing. And that gap, that convenient shrug, is exactly where the real trail begins. Because here is the part that most retellings skip entirely. When the salvage crew inspected the cargo hold carefully, they made a discovery that meant nothing to them in 1872, but means everything now. Of the 1,701 barrels of alcohol on board, they found that 9 of them were completely empty. 9 empty barrels, in a sealed hold, on a ship that had only been at sea for a few weeks. Hold on to that number, 9, because it turns out those 9 barrels are the thread that unravels the entire mystery, and it took more than a century for anyone to pull it properly. At first, the empty barrels look like nothing. Spillage. A packing error. But when researchers went back into the original cargo records, they found something the 1872 investigators never thought to ask about. The barrels were not all made of the same wood. The vast majority of the 1,701 barrels were made of white oak. But a smaller batch, and this matters enormously, was made of red oak. And if you know anything about cooperage, about how barrels are built, your stomach just dropped, because I felt mine drop when I read it. White oak is dense. The cell structure is naturally sealed, which is exactly why it's used for wine and spirits. It holds liquid tight. Red oak is porous. The grain is open. Red oak barrels leak. They leak vapor. So the 9 empty barrels were almost certainly the red oak ones, and they had been quietly breathing their contents out into the sealed cargo hold for weeks. Now picture the hold of the Mary Celeste, a warm, enclosed wooden space slowly filling with the invisible vapor of denatured alcohol, highly flammable vapor, building, concentrating, with no one aware because you cannot always smell it and you certainly cannot see it. This is the beginning of the answer, but by itself it is not enough, because if that hold had simply exploded, the ship would have burned or shattered, and she didn't. There was no fire damage, no scorching, no blast wreckage. So, how does invisible explosive vapor make 10 people abandon a perfectly floating ship without leaving a single burn mark? That question stumped me for a long time. And I know exactly what you're thinking right now, because I thought it too. You're thinking, come on, this has to have a boring explanation. Ships got abandoned all the time in the age of sail. People fall overboard. Freak waves happen. Maybe we're all just inventing a mystery out of a simple accident that nobody witnessed. If that's the voice in your head right now, good, keep it. This next part is built specifically for you, because I was the biggest skeptic in the room, and I want to walk you through every ordinary explanation and show you exactly where each one snaps. Start with the freak wave, the rogue wave that supposedly washed everyone off the deck. The problem is the yawl. That lifeboat wasn't torn away by water. The evidence showed it had been deliberately launched, its lashings undone by human hands, not ripped off by a wave. And a wave big enough to sweep 10 people off wouldn't politely leave the sails set and the cargo stacked. It would have devastated the ship. She showed no such devastation. Now, the waterspout theory, a kind of ocean tornado, supporters point to the water inside the ship and say a waterspout dumped it there and lowered the pressure enough to force water up through the pumps. It's clever. But a waterspout violent enough to terrify a seasoned captain into abandoning ship would leave chaos on deck, and the deck was orderly. And it doesn't explain why they took the navigation instruments and the ship's papers with the calm foresight of people making a planned departure. Now, the piracy and insurance fraud theories, both collapse on the same rock. The cargo was untouched. The personal valuables, including the crew's belongings, were largely still on board. Real pirates in that era took cargo and ship. And for an insurance scam, you need someone to profit and someone to talk. And in 150 years, with everyone long dead, not one shred of a payout scheme or a confession ever surfaced. The Briggs family lost their own captain, their own investment, and their own baby. Nobody does that for money. Here is where the skeptic in me finally ran out of ordinary exits. Because every simple explanation requires you to ignore at least one hard fact that we can physically verify: the set sails, the untorn rigging, the intact cargo, the missing instruments, the deliberately launched boat, the 6 months of food, and those 9 empty red oak barrels. No single boring theory holds all of those at once. Here's the thing that gets me. You just watched a mystery survive 150 years, not because the answer was missing, but because nobody bothered to read the physical evidence carefully. The 9 empty barrels, the wood grain, the clogged pump, it was all sitting right there. That gap between what we're told and what the record actually shows is exactly what I put into the Lost Origins Complete Library. 3 digital volumes you can read tonight on any device, no special app needed. In the first volume, First Threshold, there's a chapter called The Ship in the Mountain, the anatomy of a real archaeological controversy, and it works the same way this case does. Cold, careful, evidence first. And here's a test you can run for free tonight, before you ever open the books. Pick any famous unsolved case you think you know, and instead of asking who did it, ask the quiet mechanical questions the investigators skipped. Watch how fast the dramatic version starts to wobble, the same way the mutiny theory wobbled 10 minutes ago. That one habit is the whole method. The fastest way to get the books is to scan the QR code right there on your screen, or go to the link in the description or the pinned comment. And these cases don't expire. The evidence has been waiting for over a century for someone to read it properly, so there's no rush and no clock running. Now, let me show you exactly where the skeptic in me finally ran out of room to argue. Only a very specific sequence does, and that sequence is what a filmmaker finally reconstructed after 7 years of digging. Her name is Anne McGregor, a documentary researcher who became obsessed with this case the same way I did, and she refused to accept the shrug. Between roughly 2000 and 2007, she went back to the primary sources, the court records, the ship's specifications, the last logged positions, and she rebuilt the final voyage almost hour by hour. What she found is the closest thing to a solution this mystery has ever produced. Start with the last entry on the ship's log slate. It placed the Mary Celeste near the island of Santa Maria in the Azores on the morning of November 25, 1872. That was the last recorded position before she was found abandoned. And McGregor asked a question the original investigators never asked. Was that position actually correct? Because to find your position at sea in 1872, you needed 2 things working perfectly. A sextant to measure the sun, and a marine chronometer, a precision clock, to give you the exact time. If the chronometer runs even slightly wrong, your calculated longitude is wrong, and you think you are somewhere you are not. McGregor examined the type of chronometer likely aboard and the conditions of the voyage, and she built a strong case that Briggs's chronometer was running inaccurately. If that clock was off, then Briggs believed he was in a different place than he actually was. He thought he had already passed Santa Maria. He thought open sea and safety lay ahead. In reality, according to McGregor's reconstruction, the island was still roughly 120 miles away, sitting off to one side, close enough to matter, far enough to kill. That is failure number 1. A man who did not know exactly where he was. Now add failure number 2. The Mary Celeste had recently undergone work and had previously carried coal. Coal dust and construction debris can clog a ship's pump systems. When the salvage crew found her, one of the pumps had been taken apart, disassembled, with a sounding rod, the tool used to measure water in the hold, left lying nearby. McGregor's reconstruction makes brutal sense of that scene. Briggs's crew tried to measure how much water was in the ship, and the clogged, unreliable pump gave them a false, frightening reading. They took the pump apart to fix it. And in that moment, standing over a jammed pump, unable to get a clear number, they had no reliable way to know whether their ship was slowly leaking or rapidly sinking. That is failure number 2. A crew that could not tell how much water was really below them, and now bring back the 9 red oak barrels. Failure number 3. For weeks, that porous batch had been leaking alcohol vapor into the hold, and on that stretch of the voyage, the weather had turned. The ship had come through rough conditions before reaching the Azores, and then the temperature and pressure shifted. Rising warmth expands vapor. A sudden change can force it out. Picture the moment. Briggs is already unsure of his position. His crew is already spooked by a pump that won't give them a straight answer about the water in the hold. And then, from below deck, comes a sound. A rumble, a groan, barrels shifting, or a pressure release, a violent belch of alcohol vapor forcing the forward hatch, which was indeed found open and lying upside down on the deck, away from where it belonged. Maybe even a low concussive thump, vapor igniting in a brief flash that produces a bang and a burst of pressure but burns out too fast and too cool to leave a scorch mark. And that last part is not me speculating. That was tested. In 2006, at University College London, A chemist named Dr. Andrea Sella built a scale reconstruction of the Mary Celeste's hold to test exactly this. He filled a sealed box with butane vapor to simulate the alcohol fumes, and he ignited it. And here's the thing that gave me chills when I first saw the results. The explosion produced a powerful pressure wave. It blew the hatch clean off the model, but it left no fire, no soot, no scorching. The flame front was a cold, fast pressure blast that came and went in an instant, doing violent damage without leaving a single burn. Read that again. A modern laboratory recreated an explosion that could blow open a ship's hatch and terrify everyone aboard, and leave behind exactly what the salvage crew reported. No fire, no char. Just an open, displaced hatch and the smell of fear. So now assemble the whole thing, the way McGregor and Sella and the physical evidence assemble it, and watch 10 empty places at a dinner table finally get explained. Benjamin Briggs, a careful man, thinks he is safely past the Azores. His pumps won't tell him how much water is in the hold. Then the ship shudders with a rumble and a bang from below as alcohol vapor forces the hatch open. To a captain who cannot measure his water and cannot fully trust his instruments, that sound is the sound of a ship about to blow apart under a cargo of flammable spirits, with his wife and 2-year-old daughter on board. He makes the only decision a responsible captain can make, with a possible floating bomb beneath his family. He orders everyone into the yawl. They take the navigation instruments and the ship's papers, exactly as the evidence shows, because he intends to survive and be able to prove what happened. And here is the detail that turns the whole thing tragic. They likely tied the small lifeboat to the Mary Celeste with a rope, a tow line, meaning to stay attached and wait a safe distance away to see if the ship exploded. If the ship did not explode, they would pull themselves back aboard. The ship did not explode, the vapor vented and the danger passed, but by then it was too late. The wind that had been filling those sails, the sails the salvage crew found still set, pushed the Mary Celeste forward and away. The tow line snapped, or the knot failed, or the crew never got it secure in the chaos. And in an instant, the ship they had just fled began to sail away from them, faster than a small overloaded boat could ever row. 10 people sat in an open yawl in the Atlantic and watched their own ship, their food, their water, their shelter, their child's bed, sail steadily over the horizon without them. And the sea took the rest. That is why she was found 400 miles from where she should have been, still sailing, still capable, still stocked with 6 months of food, with a set table and a missing crew. She didn't fail her passengers. A leaking batch of red oak barrels, a clogged pump, and a faulty clock did. 3 tiny mechanical failures stacked on top of one another until they killed everyone aboard and left the ship herself perfectly innocent, sailing on alone. And here is what still keeps me up. The evidence for all of this was sitting in the record the entire time. The 9 empty barrels were counted in 1872. The disassembled pump was noted. The open forehatch was described. The set sails were logged. Every piece was there, but the man in charge of the inquiry, Frederick Solly Flood, was so fixated on finding a crime, on murder and mutiny and blood, that he never asked the quiet mechanical questions. He wanted a villain. The truth had no villain. Just wood grain, a jammed pump, and a wrong time. The people who could have solved this in 1872 chose the dramatic story over the boring, deadly, mechanical truth. And because they did, this became a ghost story instead of what it actually is, a chain of engineering failures and one impossible, heartbreaking decision. It took a chemist with a box of butane and a filmmaker with 7 years of patience to give those 10 people their real ending. Not spirited away, not murdered, not taken. Just a father trying to save his daughter from a danger that turned out to be smaller than the one he was fleeing into. The fiction made it worse, by the way. In 1884, a young writer named Arthur Conan Doyle, before Sherlock Holmes made him famous, published a short story about a ship he called the Mary Celeste. Stuffed with invented horrors, warm meals still steaming, a mysteriously murderous survivor. Readers believed it was fact. For over a century, most of the eerie details people repeat about the Mary Celeste, the still warm tea, the half-eaten breakfast, came not from the record but from a piece of Victorian fiction. The real mystery didn't need the embellishment. The real mystery was 3 broken things and the physics of vapor. So the next time someone tells you the Mary Celeste vanished into the supernatural, that her crew was plucked from the deck by something we cannot name, you'll know the truth is quieter and far more human. 10 people made a reasonable choice in an unreasonable moment, and the wind and a snapped rope did the rest. If you've made it this far, You're the kind of person I make these for. The kind who can't accept a shrug where an answer should be, who keeps pulling the thread everyone else dropped. That's not a small thing. That's the whole reason cases like this ever get reopened at all. So let me ask you directly, and I do want you to answer this one. Of all three failures, the leaking red oak barrels, the clogged pump that lied about the water, or the faulty chronometer that put them in the wrong place, which one do you think truly doomed them? Which single failure, if it hadn't happened, would have kept those 10 people alive? Tell me in the comments below, and tell me where in the world you're watching from, because I read every one of these and I genuinely want to know which piece hit you hardest. If reopening the file on a mystery the textbooks closed with a shrug is the kind of thing you can't resist, then stay with me here, because this is what we do. We take the cases everyone swears are solved, and we run the evidence back through until the official story stops adding up. There's another one I've been chasing, a vessel found under conditions even stranger than this, with a detail in the salvage log that no ordinary explanation has ever touched. That's where we go next. The Mary Celeste was never haunted. She was just telling the truth, sailing empty across the Atlantic, waiting 150 years for someone to finally listen. Now you have, and you'll never hear this story the same way again. Inside the Unexplained Society, I walk you through the full 3-failure chain, the Barrelwood detail, the research, exactly where this video stopped. And in there, you can ask me your own questions, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You won't be doing this alone. Mystery lovers like you are already inside. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen, and you can cancel anytime. I'd love to have you with me. Now, if that empty ship unsettled you, wait until you see what waits beneath the water. A drone went deep into Jacob's well, and what it found left scientists shaken. That footage is starting right here.